Nik, you are known as King of the High Wire, and it's a fitting name for somebody who did his first walk before he was even born. Explain that to people.
Yeah, my mom was 6 months pregnant with me and still walking the wire. Yeah, literally been walking the wire longer than I've been. My feet have been planted on terra firma.
Okay, seventh generation. How did this all start in your family?
It really dates back to the 1780s in Bohemia when my family started performing on the wire. Actually, they started just walking wires, eventually performing, making their way to Europe and then eventually the United States in 1928. And we've been doing it now for, well over 200 years and 7 generations.
It's so crazy to watch what you all do and the amount of work you put into it. We get to see the finished result, but getting there, how do you all think up these things like the 7-person pyramid and all that type of stuff?
Well, the 7-person pyramid, specifically, was created by my great grandfather in his dining room. He was sitting there with a bunch of wine glasses and started stacking them up and said, "Hey, let's try to do this on the wire." But a lot of my events, Grand Canyon, Niagara Falls, a volcano, are things that just happen. Whether it's a dream that I have at night at some point, or flying in. For instance, I was flying into Mexico City with my wife for a corporate speaking event, and as we were flying in, we flew over an active volcano about 6 years ago. And I looked out and looked over at my wife and said, "Hey, I need to walk over an active volcano." And that's how that dream came about.
I just need to walk over an active volcano. Have you ever been, and I have a feeling the answer to this is no, because that's when you run into problems, but have you ever been like right in the middle of one, thinking to yourself, it's kind of like when I ride a roller coaster, we go up and I'm like, okay. And as soon as it takes off, I'm saying to myself, I will never do this again. So have you ever been in the middle of something and thought, I'm not doing this one again?
Not necessarily in the middle. I'm in such a zone at that point, so focused on what I'm doing that it's not really a thought at that point. But there are times afterwards that I look back and go, you know what? I should never try this again. I don't know what I was thinking when I started that.
Wow. Okay, Niagara Falls. There's a lot of planning that goes into that, not only logistically whether you can do it, but even like dealing with, I'm sure, governments and all that type of stuff. What went into making that happen?
Well, it took changing 2 laws in 2 countries, one over 100 years old in the United States, in order to get permission just to walk over the falls, let alone the preparation, the physical, the mental preparation that goes into the rigging, the design, the engineering to doing the actual walk. A lot of my walks are that way. A lot of my walks will take 5, 6, 7 years in order to make happen. In fact, I've been working on Times Square for many, many years before we finally got permission to do that walk. But that's part of the challenge. It's part of the joy that I get out of it. Actually, is I enjoy probably the permitting process just as much as the performing process.
Yeah, and that bird's eye view, it's a whole different view. Obviously, Niagara Falls in a different way, the Grand Canyon in a different way.
Yeah, they are completely different. I mean, the challenges of every walk, and that's when I look for a walk, I look probably at exactly the opposite of what most would think. You would want to walk as low and close to the ground in a safe environment. When I look at an event, I look at how long can I make that walk? Everything from facing heavy, of course, high heat, heavy winds over that volcano. The gases were extremely thick. Niagara Falls was extremely wet, extremely windy. The Grand Canyon was extremely windy. In fact, 48-mile-an-hour wind gusts as I was walking across the Grand Canyon, 1,800 feet up without any safety.
Wow, so that gets to the unknown, if you will. And I think that's what we're mired in when we deal with fear, is that we don't know the unknown. Your new book, Facing Fear, Step Out in Faith and Rise Above What's Holding You Back. You're the perfect person to talk about this. Just in the comparison of people's biggest fears, one of them is the fear of heights, but fear comes from everywhere, especially in the atmosphere that we're in right now. What are some of your basic tips of how we address fear? First, I guess we have to recognize it.
Yeah, that's right. It is a process that we have to walk through. We have to recognize that we are fearful, and then find out what we're fearful of, and what is the root is really what it comes down to. What is the root of what is causing that fear? What I learned through that process, and the book really is about an accident we had back in 2017, where we were training to break a world record for the tallest or highest 8-person pyramid on the wire. And after 6 weeks of training, we brought it up full height, and about halfway out on that wire, my worst nightmare became a reality, and that pyramid collapsed. that's really when fear crept in. And to be honest with you, I did what I thought everybody tells you to do: get back on the horse. I got back on the wire the next day and performed for the next month. But the reality was, I buried that fear by getting back on that wire. I didn't deal with that situation. So there was a seed planted in my head, and I sort of just buried it. And then after about 6 weeks of performing, I actually started to water that seed, and it became so strong and so powerful in my mind that it overtook my thoughts. And I often talk to people about negative thoughts and thoughts of fear, like a weed growing in your garden. Often, if you don't immediately pluck that weed out, eventually it'll spread seeds, germinate, and take over your whole garden. Well, that's the same with our minds. And if there's anything I learned while going through this process of dealing with fear in a way that became debilitating, I said I would never walk the wire again. But what I learned was that our minds are a powerful tool. And I'd been taught that my entire life, but I forgot what I'd been taught. And we can control our thoughts. And my thoughts were focusing on one accident rather than the thousands of successful times I'd completed that walk. And often that is the way our minds work. So really, it is about finding the root of the fear and then naming that fear. I like to call that fear by name, or anything that I'm dealing with, really call it out. I think there's something powerful about that. And then walk through it and walk towards healing. And that process isn't easy. In fact, I was stopped in my tracks. I said I would never get on the wire again. But I realized I was sort of stuck, and it caused me to go into a state of depression and into a deep place, dark place. And what I learned was I needed to get back up. And even though I was fearful, even though some steps were more fearful than others, I had to continue to walk through that fear in order to get to the other side.
And speaking of steps, a lot of times what we do when something like that happens is we don't ask, okay, so what happened? How did that happen? And then you learn so you can avoid it next time, right?
That's right. Yeah, a lot of it is just digging down deep to the deep to find the root of what has caused it, and then learning about that cause. And again, that might sound goofy, but the reality is we do have to dig up, even though it's really hard. And I buried it to the point where it became very, very hard and an emotional roller coaster in order to dig it back up to deal with it. But I think so often in life we do that. We compartmentalize our thoughts and we'll put them in these compartments and think we're doing the right thing. Well, often what we're doing is, again, just burying it, and it's only going to come back even worse. And often that leads to depression, anxiety. It leads to fear. It leads to alcoholism and drug abuse, all sorts of things. And really, what we have to do is find out what is the cause. In fact, when I had to deal with this, I had to not only go back to the fear, but now I was fearful. I was to the point where I was literally trembling on the wire. So everybody around me knew that I was fearful. I couldn't keep it in, couldn't keep it together, couldn't keep it hidden. So then I had to deal with shame, because there was a lot of shame involved with the fact that I was fearful. I'm human, and so many people think that I'm supernatural and that I'm superhuman because of the things that I do. But the reality is, I'm just like anyone else, and I have weak points as well. And what I had to do was deal with that shame, and then had to go and deal with the fear and walk through that fear in order to get to the other side.
Okay, Nick, I have news for you. You are superhuman. Just the fact that you got up and stood on the high wire, you're superhuman. Is there any high wire act that you can think of that is absolutely impossible? You know it can never happen, but you wish it could?
I don't believe that anything's impossible. I live by the words "never give up," and I do what I do to encourage and inspire other people that nothing is impossible. So, to be honest with you, I'm working on a walk in outer space right now, or an event in outer space, which again, most people would say is impossible. To me, I can make it a reality. Again, with surrounding myself with the right people and working extremely hard, I believe I can get there.
Wow, that would be really cool to see, because we are the space city. So if you do make that happen, we got to talk to you again.
Sounds great.
Nick, thank you very much.
Thanks so much.